Hello folks, this is Steve A. for you. I'm not promoting anything, I'm not recommending anything. I'm looking at this. Business Insider. The full list of major U.S. companies slashing staff this year. This is a recent article. Cargill. I have an ag background. That's an ag company. Last year's job cuts weren't the end of layoffs, further reductions in 2024. Cargill it's the U.S. biggest privately owned company, cutting thousands of jobs. Microtech is closing an Arizona factory. Publishing giant Hearst magazine trims staff. Boeing starts issuing layoff notices to 400 workers amid plans for 10% global cut. Exxon, 400 jobs. AMD, 4% of the workforce, etc., etc., etc. So the news today is the Trump administration to slash 1,600 USDA positions just before midnight. 4,700 will be put on leave. That's in the news every day just recently. Now, it's been a while since I was employed. We'd have to go back to the first decade of this. I don't know why they're showing a video. I don't see how I can stop it. There's the bad guys. So what's the headline? Musk orders U.S. federal workers to report on work by Monday or resign. That's what I want to talk about. Because the presumption is they're going to let people go. I've held jobs in a number of different industries. Pharmaceutical, ag chemical, agriculture, electronics, computers. In each of them, there came a time during the year when you had to write up what your accomplishments were during the past year, because it was time for your manager to evaluate you. That's pretty routine. So we did it. We wrote up about ourselves and sent it to the manager, and then we'd have a meeting with the manager. Now, in my last position at an internationally known, internationally operating IT company, I held several different positions, and all but the last were on a yearly review cycle. All but the last. The last position was a direct customer support position. What that means is I did what was called level 2 support for a major headline software product that companies worldwide use to create their web presence. Because at that time there was kind of a revolution going on. Instead of calling up like to do Caribbean cruise ordering, you would go to the web instead of calling an 800 number. Everybody, you do your banking online. Apply for jobs online. Buy things online. Well, that kind of infrastructure runs into problems, and there needs to be product support. So the customer opens a problem record. They've got a problem, something they don't understand, or they may have everything up to an emergency. And you take a problem record off the queue, assign it to yourself, and you work with the customer to solve it. That's what I did for 3 years in my last position. Now, there was one way in which that position was different from any other I had worked in. And it was this. There were 150 of us, literally, who did exactly the same job. Major product, worldwide client base. So there were multiple managers. My manager, when I retired, said to the little group that was standing there having ice cream and cake, I used to do the job that you're doing now, level 2 support, before I became a manager 10 years ago. And I can tell you that being a manager for 10 years, Steve is the first person I've managed who is retiring. Now, during those 10 years, there were many departures, mostly under less than happy circumstances. I was the first person that he had managed that actually retired. Now, there was something special about that particular job, and it didn't apply just to me. For level 2 support of that particular headline product, the managers, including mine, were required to reevaluate each of us every month. Not every year. Yes, we did that too. Every month. What does that mean? Well, I typically would close about 16 problem records each month. Some people closed more, and a few people closed. I was right at the median all the time. So my manager, that person I spoke of, would look over the problem records I had closed the previous month, and he would was required to choose 3 or 4 and contact the customers by telephone and speak to the person that I had interacted with to solve the problem. To discuss in depth how it had gone. No multiple choice things. To discuss in depth with the customer that was on the other end what had happened and how it went. Every month. Musk orders U.S. federal workers to report on work by Monday or resign. And there's a riot. They can't believe this. Apparently, the work that I and my colleagues did with respect to these customers who were making huge investments and gambling the futures of their companies in many cases required on our side, the internationally known, internationally operating company, to be sure we were on our toes, that we were really solving problems, keeping the customers out of trouble, not just letting them go under. So each of us was evaluated each month. And there's a riot about Musk orders U.S. federal workers to report on work by Monday or to resign. What's so special about them? Now, have I ever had any contact with federal workers? The answer is yes, and they were primarily USDA, United States Department of Agriculture, including all the way up to scientists with PhDs doing big research projects. But I want to tell you about an ordinary worker that I met. It was while I was doing a master's degree or something like that. She was in the same department. It was an agronomy department. She was doing a master's degree. She came back to school. But prior to that, she had been a USDA worker. This was out in the Midwest, in the Corn Belt. Now, at that time, in about the mid-1980s, there arose a problem with something called aflatoxin, which really got going in peanuts, but then also adapted itself to the corn crop. The aflatoxin would produce intermediate chemicals in the peanuts or in the corn kernels that, when metabolized by your system or my system, would produce a carcinogenic agent, cancer producer. In the peanut industry, it was so bad that companies that used peanuts directly in their final food products built special machines that as they fed the peanuts into the production beginning, it would go through this machine, which had UV radiation and a computer and a microscope, and if it saw any fluorescence, the machine would throw the peanut away. Otherwise, it would throw it forward, which means it was good to go into a food product. I want to give you a feeling for how it affected the food industry. I'm not exaggerating. That was a big, big upfront cost. They could not use peanuts. They just had to be safe. So they had to go to what you might consider to be, under ordinary circumstances, extreme measures. That's what the food processors had to do that used peanuts. So there was this gal in the department, and she was doing a master's degree, but before that, she had previously gotten a bachelor's degree in agronomy and went to work, and she was a USDA worker. And this was in the Midwest, and she worked at a place where, now you have to think of Iowa, where all the farmers, when they're harvesting the corn, come to that rail depot, storage tanks, knock the kernels off the cob, and load it finally into railroad cars to be shipped to the buyer, a commercial company that would use the corn kernels for food or feed or whatever. Her job, this is a person I knew personally, and I'm repeating what she told me. Her job was to go out to the rail yard, pick a rail car that had been loaded with maize, corn, get up there and with this special probe, push it down into the middle of it, and then do this with it, and it would get some corn kernels. Sample it. And then she would go back to the lab, and she would put those into an envelope, address it, and ship it off to a laboratory for analysis for aflatoxin. But she would also just do a preliminary look with a fluorescent light under the microscope. She was a regular employee. She worked 8 hours a day, 5 days a week, and each day, according to her, she sampled one rail car out of maybe 10 or 20 or 30 that were loaded that day. And what did she do with the rest of her day? She turned the radio on and read. Now let me go back to the headline here that's causing so much consternation. Musk orders U.S. federal workers to report on work, write up what they're doing and what they've accomplished by Monday or resign. Got it? This is Steve A.B. Foyal. All I have spoken of is personal, direct experience. Saying see you in 73.